Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Brazen Azn podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Virginia Duan, also known as Miranda Mama. I'm the entertainment editor for Mochi Magazine, as well as the author of my debut novel, Elusive.
And I'm your other co-host, Stella.
All right. So, folks, this is the inaugural episode, so we don't really know what we're doing, but it should be fun because we always have fantastic conversations and everyone else always wants to get in on them. And we say, maybe if you're nice to us. So, actually, we don't say that at all. No one ever asks. So today for our inaugural episode, we're going to talk about what is a Brazn Azn? Why do we have a podcast about it? And who gets to decide what is a Brazn Azn?
So on that note, Virginia, I was meaning to ask you, what is the story behind how and why you started Brazn Azn?
Okay, so it has nothing to do with podcasting. It's a very weird, what is it called? Evolution, we'll call it. I want to say in 2019, I was at a big blogging conference called Mom 2.0 Summit. And there were maybe a handful of Asian women bloggers there. And it was really, I always feel this way at blogging conferences. And so it was really difficult in that sense. But I do have a ton of friends there, so it was fine. So the handful of Asian bloggers grabbed me and said, hey, we're going to go out. And I said, okay. I said,
you've been kidnapped.
No, but I really wanted to, but I was we can talk more about this later, but I was really intimidated by them because they were huge bloggers and I was not that huge. And they're really successful and they're also really cool. And I was not that type of cool. So I was just really excited to be invited. So the short answer is I went with these fellow Asian bloggers and we were all talking about how there aren't enough Asian bloggers and we wanted more of them. And we started talking about maybe we should throw a conference for just Asian bloggers. And then I was like, we should call it Brazn Azn, but spell it AZN because it's funny. And they didn't think it was funny.
The corniest thing ever.
They didn't think it was funny.
They didn't think it was funny?
Or I don't remember because I was really fucking drunk. I was way drunk. I had started drinking from 10:30 in the morning. So by the end of the night, I was 17 drinks in, which sounds like a lot, but it was 17 hours later. So it was a drink an hour if you just evenly spaced it out. So the fact that I reserved the domain while completely plastered, I reserved the domain and its socials. And then the next day I was like, who did this? I did. I guess I did because no one else wanted it. So yeah, that's
I mean, some people go on shopping binges when they're drunk, but you register domain names.
I do.
That's
I collect a lot of domain names, I have to say. I just park them. And they're really expensive because you not only have to pay for the actual name, you have to pay for privacy, right? So people don't know where you live.
Yeah.
So that's how it came to be. And then a few months later, in early 2020, I went to a retreat put on by my business coach and I won some pitch contest. I won second place. They gave me a bunch of money to throw this retreat for Asian creators.
Yay money.
That I did not want to.
Yes.
I mean, yes, yay for money, yay for being second place, but boo for planning things because I hate planning things. And I had no idea how to pull off this Asian retreat that no one was going to attend. And then the pandemic happened, so I didn't have to do it at all. Yay! I mean, boo pandemic.
Yay!
Yay for no planning. And then I pivoted to it being a Zoom panel. So I did one thing. I managed one event where I got some of my political-minded friends who are in local politics to be on the Zoom panel. And that was the last I ever did anything with a name. And now here we are.
So that was 4 years ago. Yeah, I was going to say, that's 4 years ago.
Yeah, that was 4 or 5 years ago. So then we were chatting and I was like, hey, I own this domain. Why don't we do something with it?
Why don't we start a if bros can start a podcast with a mic and a webcam, I don't know why women can't.
Exactly. So I know that when we were in talks about this first episode or even calling it Brazn Azn, you Stella were having some, I guess, internal struggle about it. I guess, could you tell us a little bit about what the struggle was?
Yeah. No, I think a lot of Asian Americans are going to relate to what I have to say, which is this idea that like I love being Asian American more than anything. I love it. I would not trade it for anything in the world. But sometimes when I'm like, I don't see myself represented in Asian American media a lot. And I don't always relate to it. And I don't always relate to like, it's cool to see so many Asian American podcasts, so many books written by Asian Americans about the Asian American experience, like to see these shows. It's amazing. But a part of me is like, that is not my experience. And I do not relate at all. And so I was very much like, do I want to be a part of something that's so Asian themed? With, it was like a complicated feeling. And I was like, is this leftover cringe culture from when I was growing up and it wasn't as easy to be Asian at times, despite living in SoCal in the 90s and 2000s? Is this like leftover internalized white supremacy and cringe culture? Or is this me trying to figure out how to navigate these sections of Asian American representation that I don't always connect to?
Oh, so
I think ultimately the place that I landed on was that I think a lot of Asian Americans feel the same. I think a lot of Asian Americans are afraid of being siloed, and stuck in this space of like Asian American as being their only identity. And it's hard when white supremacy doesn't want to give us more space than that. You'll see like a cast with a couple of Asian characters and people will be like, why are there so many Asians though? Like it's supposed to be a diverse show. And it's like literally one character is East Asian and one character is like Southeast Asian, and they're different genders and one of them is gay, and it's too much Asian representation. You're like, the fuck? And so I feel like maybe what I need to do is keep putting myself out there as somebody who does have a lot of multiplicities in her identity and is still Asian and so proud to be Asian and happy to be Asian, so that we keep getting more diversity and people realize that being Asian is not a singular experience, right?
So what were the types of representation that you appreciate seeing but you did not personally identify with? Like, could you give me some examples? I mean, I don't personally identify with the Monkey King, but at least right, like that's cool. But I do.
But it is, isn't it? Yeah, but isn't it so cool to see like a myth that's such a huge part of a traditional culture that you belong to, to see it like retold and reimagined? Like it's so fun, right? If somebody did that with like a Korean story, I would be like, this is amazing.
Right.
I think some of it is that a lot of the stories about being an Asian American center really strongly on identity integration.
Oh, tell us
more. They
more.
center really strongly on an Asian American who isn't comfortable in being Asian at times and is trying to figure out how to be. They're stuck between two worlds. They go to an all-white school or PWI, like a predominantly white institution. But their family is super traditional and kind of conservative. And so those are the binaries in their lives. And I mean, I grew up, because you were in school in SoCal too. I grew up in SoCal. I was born and raised there. I lived 40 minutes from K-Town. I came of age in the 90s, early 2000s, right? So for me, I got to grow up with so much access to both Korean culture, but also Korean American culture.
Yeah.
I got to grow up, right? And so when people talk about like, oh, I never saw Asian men being considered attractive until I got into K-pop like in the 2010s or 2015s. And I'm like, I got to see Korean men being actors and singers and songwriters and dancers in the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, through your peers.
My parents, or like my parents would rent pop like music bank videos from like, the Korean video stores. And so I always got to see it. They were always watching Korean news. And so for me, it was like, of course there's hot Asian guys. Of course there are so many girls who are way into Asian guys. Because for me, not only was that what I was seeing on the screen, but it was also like we had a lot of Asian guys at my school. And there were people of all races interested in them.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, yes, there was definitely still this element of dehumanization that I think Asian men experienced even in my circles, but it wasn't nearly as much as what you would normally see, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, that's not like this. And I definitely, as a teenager, did go through this, oh, I don't know how it feels to be Korean and Korean American. But as I got older, I realized that the struggle I was experiencing was because I was queer, because I was neurodivergent. We don't see stories about, I mean, now we see way more stories about queer Asian Americans,
right.
Trans Asian Americans, right? And I love it. But we didn't see that for a long time. And even now in mainstream Asian American representation in the media, it's not as common, which is why we love to see Joel Kim Booster and Bowen Yang being, you know, hot Asian gay men, right? But where are the women?
I mean,
where are the women?
Well, maybe it's because I watch a lot of Asian American comics. I'm like, isn't Irene too? Isn't, or like Sharon Cola? Isn't that her name? Isn't she like queer Asian?
Oh yeah, I think so. And she was in, what's it, Girls Trip?
Yeah, Girls Joyride.
Joyride. I want to see that movie. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it. I feel so bad.
We need to do an episode on it.
Maybe, yeah, because my friend, my friend's friend wrote it, I think. You know.
Yeah. But I mean, to like kind of get back to the original question, I think that it's hard sometimes when you're a very weird Asian to find representation in the things that. The other thing is, a lot of Asian American representation is about representation or identity politics. It's about making us palatable or relatable to white people. And it's about fulfilling this role where it's like, this is how they fit into the fabric of America. And I'm like, but that's not true for all of us. That's not always the case. And that's not how I want to fit into America.
It's, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's funny when you bring this up because I don't think I've ever not felt Asian, and I don't necessarily identify with a lot of the Asian representation, but I don't not identify with it, if that makes sense. I don't feel underserved, other than the fact that now I'm middle-aged and I don't see any moms, and or we just die like in the first like 10 minutes so that we can be some sort of jumping off point for the main hero, right? Like,
yeah, we get fridged.
Yeah, yes, that's the term, fridged, which is a delight.
Yeah, we get fridged.
I think instead of it, for me, it's not so much that I don't identify with the story of trying to figure out my Asian American identity, because I guess I went through like a minor version of it, but it wasn't that. I grew up in the Bay Area, and I went to an all Chinese church. I went to a Chinese school. I went to a school that, you know, my hometown was like 9% Asian, I think. But because I was in all AP classes, my AP classes were 50% Asian. So it wasn't so much that I didn't have enough Asians. It's just that I did not experience beyond Chinese, Taiwanese, Hong Kong American. So I knew like 2 Korean Americans. I knew like 2 Filipino Americans and like 1 Japanese American. And I think they were, you know what I mean? And the reason why I knew 2 is because maybe they weren't related. Maybe, okay, if I knew the related people, it would be like 4, you know? But like, so yeah, so I think for me, I just didn't realize that other Asian people existed, if that makes sense. Because Asian America is like AAPI, AANHPI month is like really dominated by not only East Asian, but Chinese in specific. Maybe it's changing slowly because of Hallyu and like Korean stuff, the Korean wave, I guess. But I want to say that most people equate Chinese or Chinese American with the Asian American identity, which, I mean, there's yay for yellow supremacy, I guess, but but also,
I mean, statistically, Chinese people make up an incredible portion of the planet.
Well,
Like,
yes, and also,
Yeah.
we're 22% of the Asian American population, right? So I get, and then I think next highest is Indian American. So I get why we are the face, but I don't think it should be. And so for me, it was my understanding of Asian American evolved when I met more non-Chinese Asian people. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So,
And it's like you don't know what you don't know. Like you can't have any concept of what else is out there if you don't get the opportunity to kind of experience new things. And I think that's why having so much diversity in media, having more and more stories is really valuable, right? It gives people a window into what it's like. But I do worry sometimes that a lot of these stories are either about becoming palatable to white America or creating this concept of Asian America that's about pop culture and proving that we're just as normal and as cool as white people.
oh yeah.
Or black people.
Right.
I mean,
Well, black people are the gold
let's not
standard
lie.
of cool. Let's be real.
but right, instead of really being able to come up with an identity that is uniquely Asian American, which is challenging. We are an incredibly diverse group, like both regionally and ethnically.
Yeah.
It's just so broad. I don't know if we could come up with like an Asian American identity that really fits us all.
Yeah, and particularly because we encompass so many. There's Asian Americans who are here like fourth, fifth generations, right? My kids are fifth generation Asian on their dad's side,
Right. So it's like his great grandparents.
yeah. So like
Yeah. Like
fifth. Yeah, I think they're
we're like born here.
Yeah, they're so they're fifth generation Asian Americans from my husband's side, and they're third generation from my side, right? But I feel like still the main stories we see are first or 1.5 or second generation stories.
Yeah. And I think that that's like the narrative that mainstream America expects.
Yes, because we can see the becoming of American, if that makes sense, because it reinforces
right.
lie of this mythical American dream, and it's like propaganda to become American, and again, nothing wrong with being American, and also lots of things wrong with being American. So I wanted to also discuss what you think of in terms of brazen. So I chose Brazen Asian originally because brazen means shameless, right? It means audaciously, and I associate it with being loud, out, and proud, which I realize is a queer thing, and it's often lobbed at people like, oh, you're so brazen, and it's usually a negative connotation.
Right. Overly direct,
Yeah.
aggressive,
Yes.
demanding. Yeah, all things that women are not often allowed to be,
Or
but
Asians.
particularly Asian. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think that there is this mentality that because of the emasculation of straight Asian American men, that they could benefit from being more brazen to fit in with white corporate America, but that Asian women, particularly like cishet Asian women, are really punished for being brazen. And I think we're punished in multiple spheres, right? Both our home culture and like mainstream white American culture. Neither of those really wants us to be a shameless, loud, demanding woman.
Yes. Yeah. But I think even as the years have gone by, my idea of brazen has changed. So when I first conceived of this Brazen Asian name, I wanted like the splashiest, loudest. I wanted to say, hey, we're here. That's why I also chose AZN, because back in the 90s, for you young children, AZNs were they like super cool Asians, Asian pride type of folks, but in a particularly somewhat isolationist sort of way, not allied type of way, but like as almost a replacement for an Asian supremacy, if you will. At least that's how I felt it. That probably most people were probably just in it for the culture. But I just always found it amusing, and also like kind of coveted it, and also I found it weird and gross. So it was a combination of things. I'm going to get so many
Right.
weird feedback from this. They're like, wow. But
I think there's also an element of gang culture.
oh, yes.
In ASEAN.
Yeah.
Because, and both of us being from California, we know Asian gangs are a thing. People who are not, maybe people from other urban areas would also be like, yeah, that's obvious. But many people do not understand, like, Asian gangs are a thing.
Oh, yeah. I dated one. It was fun. So dated? Is it considered dating if you're just messing around? Well, you just messed around.
Having a really good time.
I wouldn't say it was a good time, but it was interesting. So I really originally conceived of like Brazen as like just really loud, and really in your face, really abrasive almost, really like what we consider the stereotypical activist, like I'm in your face, you have to like it, and you're like, it's very an active, defiant type of.
Yeah, defiant. I think that's a really good way to put it.
So that's kind of how I originally envisioned it. And I wanted us to be like, hey, just kind of flaunt our Asianness, if that makes sense. But as time has gone by, I'm just tired. I don't really want to convince people that I deserve to be here. Right? Like the whole like anti-Asian hate thing. I'm like, which obviously I'm not pro-Asian hate. Like no one, right? Like that seems counterproductive and bad. It's just more like I should not have to convince you that I deserve to be heard. I should not have to convince somebody that I deserve to be seen, that my story deserves to be heard, that I am a person. I shouldn't have to do any of those things. And I feel like there's so many expectations upon us as Asians, whether to represent like as a model minority so that we can have proximity to whiteness, or we have to represent in a different way of like the super activism type of way.
Yeah.
And then I was just like, but isn't it kind of brazen to just exist? And I think when I first heard my existence is resistance, I was like, yeah, why my existence is resistance, and I feel like that is the kind of brazen I want to embrace more of. And so I think that's where I've kind of evolved now, because I think when we were talking about this podcast, I was like, oh, well, maybe we need an angle, we need a hook, we need a thing like to be interesting. And I'm like, well, we are interesting and we're Asian, and why can't we be brazen in doing what we want, when we want, how we want? I feel like both of us kind of do that most of the time, but our brazenness is just existing,
podcast bros don't need a reason to exist. It's kind of like the as we talk about this, I'm starting to realize that maybe my discomfort with the name Brazen Asian was really about the weight of having to represent us when I don't feel like I'm always seen, and I don't feel like I've been represented. And so it's probably a good thing that we're taking the name, because we're just existing. That's enough.
I think so.
That's good enough.
And I feel like as women of color, as Asian women, it is pretty brazen to like talk about ourselves. It's pretty
to
brazen.
Take up space in the room.
Because what is the stereotype of Asian women? Which, if you know any Asian women at all, is hilarious, because no Asian women I know are meek and quiet and invisible. I mean, some of them are, yes, but we're not all one thing. But like, I want to say the stereotype creator did not actually know any Chinese women, because isn't that the joke? Isn't that the joke? Like, Korean men should never marry Chinese women because they both want to be the boss. That's the joke. Isn't that the joke? Like, they're both like, that's the worst combination, which makes me so sad, because I have 7 South Korean husbands who don't know that they're my husband.
What a cruel world we live in.
What a cruel world. Everyone.
What a cruel world.
I'm just joking, folks. I'm not delusional, and I know that BTS is never going to marry me, but give me
But
that.
even making the joke makes you makes people consider you to be brazen, right?
Oh yeah,
They don't even want you joking about it.
I mean, what did my husband say? My husband said, "Well, you have 3 holes and 2 hands. You can accommodate 5. Use your feet. Accommodate all 7." And I was like, that seems too much work. But
I'm pretty sure you once told me that he said he didn't take you for a quitter.
yes, I think so.
When it came. So if anybody ever asks, like, well, what does Virginia's husband think of all of this stuff? She's like, she's so into BTS. She's so obsessed. She posts all these thirst traps. And I'm like, I would like to just remind you all that he was the one that said, I'm pretty sure you could handle all 7.
Yeah, he's lying. He knows I'm lazy. I could never. And also, to clarify, when Stella says I post thirst traps, I mean thirst traps of BTS members that they themselves have posted, not thirst traps of myself, which, yeah, those would just look ridiculous.
Maybe you should. You should post. So I should have said you repost thirst traps. To bring the attention of the populace to them. Like, hey, if you haven't seen this half-naked man yet today, this is for you.
Chapter 2 is so great. All right.
I love that Tay was like, oh, chapter 2 is not about us taking our shirts off. Sir.
Just the lies, the outright lies.
The lies.
So, yeah, we should probably cut this part because people are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. I think we're trying to come full circle on Brazn Azn, right? And we were talking about how even you telling jokes about being in love with 7 men from Korea is like unacceptable to people. It's unacceptable. People get so up in arms about anyone, like women in particular, are expressing interest. We really come down so hard on teen girls and young women, and then it gets worse as we get older.
Yeah, they want to police female desire.
Right, like female desire exists. You know what I've been thinking about? I've been thinking about how we, as who we are, exist as such a threat to oppression and bigotry. Just by existing. Yeah, like just by existing, right?
Right.
I think it comes back to this concept of existence as resistance. If we weren't a threat to the oppressor, then there would be no benefit in oppressing us. There wouldn't need to be any energy pushed towards that, right? But being Brazn Azns, being women, being queer or neurodivergent, having desire and expressing it, wanting more for your life than being a wife and a mother, even if those are roles that you chose, those are all things that go so strongly against the cultural norms that we're stuck with right now. And so I think, yeah, like we really exist as a threat. And we've gotten hate comments to prove it. And so I think the fact that anyone was willing to put effort into doxing you and sending you death threats and all the hate comments we've gotten for just being a woman on the internet, I think, yeah, we exist as a threat. And I think that that's a part of being a Brazn Azn, is that even if we don't want to be a threat, even if we are trying to be as non-threatening as possible, we will always be perceived as a threat. Maybe that's not a bad thing.
Which is hilarious because we're literally both stay-at-home mothers who homeschool our children. I don't see how that's threatening in any way at all.
We've made choices in our lives here, Virginia. Choices were made. We both had kids in our 40s. Well, I was nearly 40.
I had just turned 44, 45.
Which is also pretty brazen of us, I gotta say.
What?
People have feelings. People have feelings about women who are of advanced maternal age having children.
Wait. So we're bad people if we have the baby, and we're also bad people if we get rid of it? Make it make sense.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
Of course, it doesn't hurt that we both came from Christian backgrounds, and patriarchy is really ingrained into Christianity, or at least evangelical Christianity. And I would say most Christianity.
And it fits so neatly with the Asian patriarchies that we're already used to. They dovetail in so nicely. You're like, wow, it's like a perfect fit.
Yay!
And you and I both spent a large portion of our college and young adult years being in evangelical spaces, mostly Asian evangelical spaces, but also like diverse ones. Multiracial cult spaces, as it were.
Oh my gosh, cult spaces. Well, yes. I mean, I was part of InterVarsity, which is a para-church organization. I wouldn't call it a cult, so to speak, but there were, you could also argue that it was, I suppose. The thing is, I learned about social justice and wanting and demanding justice through InterVarsity. And for that, I'll always be incredibly grateful. And also because of that, to me, Jesus and social justice go hand in hand. They're inextricable for me, even though I'm sure it is possible to want justice without Jesus. Of course, now I don't believe in Christianity at all, but at least the desire for justice remained. I would like to think that even without Christianity or Jesus, I would have been pro-justice, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's so funny because I didn't go to Ivy when I was in college because I thought they were a little too liberal, which just goes to show you exactly how fundamentalist some of my youth college groups were. It wasn't great. It's okay though. We live and learn. I was on a podcast with Liz Lynn for PAC, and she asked, like, where did you learn your concept of social justice? Like, when was it introduced to you as a thing that people could be doing? And I was like, oh, definitely the Korean immigrant church.
Really?
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about now. And I think a part of this is my parents' general approach to life, which is that we're all interconnected and it's important to help out your fellow humans. And so even now, when they're like, in their 70s, they still go out to LA to do breakfast for the homeless when they can and on the weekends and stuff. And for them, they're just like, that's what normal, decent people do. That they care about those who don't have enough and try to do their small part to provide, and that it's a community effort. And so my church growing up, it was just this concept like, oh yeah, it's really important we feed the people that come. And there's this sense of collectivism that I think it's kind of weird because Korea is also hyper-capitalist and super competitive in some ways. But I think that a lot of that is kind of more of a modern thing in trying to keep up with globalization. But culturally, I want to say we valued collectivism and community for a really, really long time. That's like an older value of ours. And so for my parents, they're just like, that's how we survived. That's how we survived all these years. People took, and obviously not everybody, there are shitty people everywhere in every community. But I think for my parents, they were like, that's a given. That's just how you try and treat people. That's how you try and care for others. And that's how a lot of their friends at church were. And when we like youth group stuff, it was a lot of times it was centered around collectivism. And so it is really interesting though, that but our church was a little smaller. Some of these bigger churches, especially now, I'm like, those are you guys have learned some real lessons from these white evangelical churches, and I don't think they're the ones I would have wanted for you.
I find that so interesting because I went to an all-Chinese church, and it was mostly folks from Hong Kong and Taiwan, because this was when I was growing up in the late 70s and 80s and even early 90s. That's where most of the Chinese population came from, right? From Hong Kong and Taiwan, because the visas available to mainland China weren't as prolific. Sinophobia, yay! But yeah, I would never, ever describe the Chinese church as collectivist. And I think it's probably the specter of communism hanging over us. Like, our people, it just, yeah, anything that smacked remotely of communism was was frowned upon.
There's a lot of trauma there. Like, your people went through it. I was going to say, for Koreans, we are a little nationalist. And sometimes that nationalism expresses itself through like Koreans being the best, but it also expresses itself through, again, this collective ideal that we have to be together and do things together. And that's partially because Korea, especially now, is a much smaller country.
Yeah, and China, I mean, if you think about the Chinese church, it was mostly you were either from Hong Kong or Taiwan, and then later folks from China came over, like from the mainland. And China's huge.
China's enormous. China is huge, like, you know, and people come from really different regions in China when they immigrate, right? And so trying to find the collective identity, I think, is really challenging when people will speak completely different dialects.
Okay, I think we've kind of gone a little bit off topic.
It's because we have so much cool shit to talk about. We really do, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and because we're interesting, it'll be fun.
It's funny because we've been recording for like an hour and a half, but I bet after all their mishaps and editing, it'll be down to like 30 minutes.
I feel like, you know, short is good, right?
Yeah, and people have no attention span nowadays. So I think short is better than too long. So now that we're kind of done with our debut podcast episode, Stella, what do you want folks to get from our podcast? What do you hope our podcast will be for people?
I think what I want most is for us to have a good time and the listeners to be like, oh yeah, no, that was fun. That was fun.
Oh, I like that. For me, I kind of envision us like, you know, someone sitting next to us in a cafe and they're just kind of eavesdropping and wanting to insert themselves into this conversation.
Right. Eavesdropping a little.
Yeah. And because we're both kind of weird, or not maybe the stereotypical Asian, or even if you are the stereotypical Asian, whatever, I hope people can see themselves in us and not feel as alone. I hope people can feel a little bit seen and represented.
Yeah. And maybe we'll feature some of our friends who are fantastic.
Or even, you know, new people.
We can make new friends.
Yay, new friends.
It's a blessing, as the former evangelical in me would say.
Oh my God, no, that's awful.
I think part of why we would struggle to keep on a theme is that you and I are genuinely interested in so many things. It would just be impossible. Like, we cannot be contained. Maybe that's also why we're Brazen Asians. We refuse to be contained. And I think I love that about us. I hope other people who listen and enjoy this, honestly, it's a little bit more of a pilot episode. Like, let's be real.
I like pilots. Folks, that's what you're going to get in every episode. Dirty jokes and puns. That's what you're going to get. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this episode. I'm Virginia Duan, also known as Mandarin Mama. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Threads at The Mandarin Mama, or you can follow my official author profile at Virginia Duan _official. What about you, Stella? Did you want to share your socials?
No, I think I'll keep it low key for now, but I'm Stella, and this was Brazen Asians, episode 1.
Bye.